This Senate Joint Resolution is one of a number around the country that are being proposed. I think last year 7 states acted on it. I don't know how many. She'll speak to how many others have in the past. But the effort is to, under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which has provision for a citizen constitutional amendment to be developed by the request of 2/3 of the states. And we would be one of the states asking for that convention to be called for the sole purpose of dealing with the issue of the Citizens United decision. And that's all it is. And there's some controversy, that, of course, that when we initiated this, we introduced this last year, if you remember, and since then, people have been saying to me, various groups have been saying to me, well, don't do this because you can't control it. It'll deal with anything under the sun. There's no way to just limit it to this purpose. And if the clear language of the resolution doesn't do it, you know, I don't know what the whole point of having resolutions is. I mean, the language is very clear that that's the only purpose that we would throw our support to a constitutional convention for. Madam Chairman and committee members, on 3 separate occasions I tried to back out of doing this. Each time a member of Wolfpack would sit me down, bring me back from the edge of the cliff, and explain to me why we're doing this. And they're absolutely right. The testimony today made me want to cry. I mean, why are we worried about the danger of the people speaking their mind? The real danger is what Bill Moyers said 10 years ago now, that we've become an oligarchy. And we didn't even know it happened. We never voted for that amendment. It just happened. They did it. They took our democracy away. I don't know any bigger danger than that.
Throughout my first term, I sponsored a few pieces of legislation that I felt very strongly about, that were good for this state, for businesses in this state, for our state's economy, and a very powerful special interest group on my side of the aisle tried to find a primary opponent against me and tried to fund them and tried to take me out of my seat. And that's just reality, because they disagreed with the stance I took, and I don't know if that's a good representation of what democracy should look like. That if you have a big enough checkbook, you can bully and threaten elected representatives into voting a certain way. And that we have this mentality of sort of loyalty codes, that if you don't vote with a special interest group 100% of the time, you're somehow not a real Democrat, not a true Democrat. I think that's wrong. You know, I was sent up here to vote my conscience and to vote my district and to vote what I think is right. And this is the first chance I've had to speak openly about this, but I find it incredibly insulting that we've gotten to a point where this idea of being 100%, you know, we've got all these grading cards around here that label us 100%, you know, for this group, 100% for that group. And if you're below 100%, you're not a real Democrat, you're not a real progressive, you're not a real Republican, you're not a real conservative, you're not a real anything. And when did being a real Democrat start mattering more than being a real American? When did loyalty to political party become more important than loyalty to good government and to our country and to our rule of law?
Regardless of the whereas clauses, what you're talking about, I think a little revolution's good for this Republic from now on time again. So I'm going to vote for this. I vote for all these. I hope we don't revoke the other ones that we have already passed. I think we've had 3 that we passed in history in New Mexico that were 4. I hope we don't revoke those, because I think this Republican states have to stand up to the federal government from time to time. And we haven't done that for over 200 years, and it's time for us to do it. And let us have those debates here in New Mexico, because we do a good job in New Mexico. We fight all the time here, but then we hug and we kiss and we make up and we move on. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing this. I'm going to vote for all these Article 5s. I told myself I was going to do that from the beginning. And I wish those groups that would profess to stand up for democracy would help us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ivy Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you know, this is one of the issues that I've spent a fair amount of time looking at, and I have a 700-page book that I ordered this last year that is sitting in my office about runaway conventions, which I have precisely so that I can rebut the need to do these Article 5s and why it's a bad idea. An Article 5 convention just scares the hell out of me. It really does. The status quo scares me more. You know, we are volunteers here in New Mexico in the legislature. We don't get paid. We're the only state in the union where we get no salary for what we do. And occasionally something goes on the ballot to change the Constitution to allow us to get paid something, and the people have consistently resounding said, you're overpaid for what you do as it is. You know, and yet when because of the problem of redistricting and the fact that districting is done on a partisan basis, there are only a certain number of swing districts in each chamber. I have the privilege of representing one of those in the Senate. Consequently, when I ran for re-election, there was a significant amount of work done to capture my seat. And the work that was done to capture my seat, some people told me straight up, we have no problems with you, we just want your seat. And we just don't have that many options of where we're going to go. And so that exacerbated the amount of money that was spent in my race. I ended up having to raise about $225,000 to keep a volunteer position. My opponent, a first-time candidate, impressively raised about $157,000, $170,000. When you add in the third-party groups for a volunteer position, all told, over $700,000 was spent. And you know, and the thing is, and at some point, Senator Morris, maybe you and I.
You kicked ass.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Maybe and Senator Morris, maybe at some point you and I should go have a drink sometime and clear the air on some things, because you know my opponent was, we always refer to him in our campaign as number 4, because Senator Morris recruited 3 other people to run against me before they came up with the guy who ran against me. Okay. Maybe it's for sure I'll be number 2. But, yeah. But you know, part of the problem they had in finding people to run against me was the amount of time they're going to have to spend raising money, and finding someone who's willing to commit themselves for a volunteer position. As Representative Lujan Grisham has indicated, and I'm not going to ask her to weigh in on this because she's here officially, but as she's indicated that she's planning to move on to other endeavors at the end of this term. Frankly, several people have come and talked to me about, would you be available to run for the 1st congressional seat? And the number one reason why I am not interested in running for the 1st congressional seat, not that I've ruled it out, but the number one reason why I'm not interested in it is because spending 7 to 9 hours a day raising money, calling people I've never met and asking them to donate money to my campaign, and to some degree even worse, calling people I have met and asking them to donate to my campaign, is just something that's not attractive to me. This is, I used to be the state election director. Our current state election director is sitting here right now. When I was state election director, I used to tell people this position was invented for me even before I was born. Because I have such a love for this country and such a love for democracy, because I'm a first-generation American. My mother, Cuban. My grandfather, having spent years in prison as a political prisoner in Cuba. And for opposing the government. For the act of opposing the government, he was initially put on death row. spent 45 days on death row at a time when people were being taken out and shot on a daily basis. Through nothing short of the grace of God, was given a retrial where he was not invited to attend. And through a lawyer who risked his own safety, my grandfather's death sentence was commuted. He still spent over 12 years in prison. Took over 8 years more after that for him to get out of Cuba. I was blessed to be the favorite grandchild for the last 18 years of his life. And so, you know, my devotion to policy, my devotion to having been the state election director, my devotion to making sure we get things right is based on my appreciation of the fact that we live in a society where we're not only permitted, but to some degree we should all be encouraged to challenge our government. We should be encouraged to stand up and say we disagree. And we should never be fearful of doing that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Purtle.
And you know what's amazing about being a New Mexico senator, especially from a rural community, is I can't go to the grocery store without having 5 to 10 people wanting to talk to me about various issues. And I don't mind it. I actually enjoy it. Now, my wife won't send me to the grocery store if we need something within the next 3 hours because, you know, I can take something as simple as going and getting a gallon of milk, take 3 hours. But to me, that's how they envisioned our government, bottom up. And unfortunately, we've become top down. And the gentleman in the back, I think his testimony was great, along with the young man in the front here. That's where a lot of the people are feeling disconnected, that the elections are being bought as opposed to free and fair. I don't know that we can limit the Article 5. I think we're kind of putting too much power into the clerks at the U.S. Congress to say, well, they passed a bunch of different ones, so we're not going to count that for the threshold. As a state, I believe we can limit our delegates on what issues they can vote on. I think that would probably be the better way of limiting an Article 5. But the limitation on an Article 5, the runaway convention, is just a way that people that are for the status quo can stand up and scream the sky is falling, and to prevent this power that we have as a legislature to ensure that our federal government works for the people, works for the states. And so what they do is they claim this runaway convention is going to happen. But there's one minor detail that everyone overlooks, and that's the fact that 38 states will have to ratify anything that comes out of that convention. And anybody that knows anything about the states is it's pretty disorganized when it comes to communication between, because we are all independent sovereign powers. Our legislatures meet at different times. Texas meets once every 2 years. We meet every year, but only every other year can we discuss every issue. Some states meet all the time. Some are paid good salaries. Wyoming, I think they get a salary. It's not a whole heck of a lot, but it's more than what we get. So, I mean, that in itself to me is a hurdle that makes this impossible. This is the easy step in my mind, is having the convention. The biggest hurdle is going to be ratification by 38, correct? 38 states. Currently, I was just looking on my smartphone, 32 of the legislatures are controlled 100% Republican, and then the rest Democrat. And I know this is a nonpartisan issue, but there's a lot of concern with things, and I think sometimes that's why certain groups stand up against it, is because they're already assuming outcomes. And, you know, the government wasn't created Republican versus Democrat. It was for the people, by the people. And so this is a way that the people can say, you know, we disagree with the way things are going. This was put in for a very specific purpose, and I think this is one of those issues. I think there's other issues that I'd like to see in Article 5 called. But for the main point of just sending a message to Congress that as the states, we're not going to just lay down and take it. We're going to stand up and for our people, for my district, District 32. And so for that reason, Madam Chair, I'm going to support this as all of them, and hopefully we don't rescind the other ones that we brought forward. I know that's not this issue. But I'm really in support of an Article 5 convention. I think that's something that our country is in need of right now, to send a message to the federal government that we're ready. If you're not going to do the work that we elected you to do, we're ready to do it for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I get to add my few cents worth. Actually, it's gone up to $1, so we'll see my dollars. And I appreciate Senator Ortiz-Pino continuing the movement on this measure, because Senator Candelaria thought about it. I did introduce it 3 years ago. And Senator Ortiz-Pino and I co-signed, and just because of my other familial obligations, I haven't had the chance to devote more time. And I appreciate the Congresswoman being here, and of course for you also with your passion, and those of you who are here today. I think this is a discussion, and this was driving around New Mexico, listening to NPR one day. I heard the discussion of what was happening in the state of California. And listening to what had happened in the debate, you go online and do your research and such, and I thought it was very interesting, and for as long as I've been in this body, is for us to really have the discussion that we even had here today. We haven't really had it. When I first ran for office, granted it's in a safe Democrat district, I only raised $2,000 to challenge an incumbent Democrat. $2,000, that was 20 years ago. $2,000, okay? $2,000 to where we are at this point in time in a campaign. It seems incredulous to even say and think about that. But where we've come at this point over the last 20 years that I have seen while I've been here in this legislature, money is OMG. I won't say the word I want to say, but where have we come? And when we talk about a democracy, yes, we're a republic. Those of us who pay attention, and I appreciate the young man who's here, we have to challenge ourselves. And I believe that this is a conversation the legislature needs to have, because we are here because of the money that's poured into the campaign. And none of us can negate that. Without the money behind the campaigns, we wouldn't be here. I don't care what party we're in. You don't just walk up and say, and vote for me, and people are going to come. And there's the media, there's social media, and there's so many other influences that are out there. It's amazing. If we don't begin to have this conversation at this level where we are as state policymakers, then what the heck are we giving to our young leaders? What are we giving to our children, 4 years old? Time passes so dang quickly. What are we leaving to them, to your grandchildren, Congresswoman? It's what are we doing? We have to have this discussion, and that was kind of my impetus for introducing it 3 years ago. And again, thank you for continuing the movement, because I think this is most important for us to have. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I think the sponsor would like to move a due pass motion.
I would, Madam Chairman.
I'll second it. If you would call the roll, please.
Senator Baca.
Yes.
Senator Candelaria.
Yes.
Senator Ingle. Senator Ivy Soto.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Morris.
Yes.
Senator Ortiz-Pino.
Yes.
Senator Papin.
Yes.
Senator Purtle.
Yes.
Senator Sanchez. Senator Steinborn.
Yes.
Senator Lopez.
Yes, you have a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, members.
It's interesting what Mr. Jordan said at the end about being in favor of a constitutional amendment, but not being in favor of a constitutional convention.
You're on the top.
Because during the
I moved you.
Rules Committee hearing, those of you who are here for the Rules Committee hearing, which several of you were, U.S. Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham appeared and told everyone, I have filed for an amendment, but Congress is so broken, I am here to argue for this resolution. And the problem is that unless states start taking action, Congress is so tone deaf, nothing will ever take place. And from where I'm sitting, things are going from bad to significantly worse. And so I support our amended call for a convention, making it restricted and limited, precisely because you know, I would much prefer Congress do their job, but the testimony in this very room from a member of Congress is that Congress will not do their job unless the states apply pressure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
What I like about this resolution is, as I've studied it, there have been other resolutions for a constitutional convention proposed. And what happens is when enough states start to ratify them, Congress says, oh, we didn't mean this all along, and yeah, we'll go ahead and do this without doing a convention. So I do see there is merit to pushing these forward, but I also see there's other things that need to progress simultaneously to this. And those other things are court cases that are percolating now. And I would rather let those take their course before we take this drastic action. So I think subsequently I have to vote against this, not because it's not the right thing to do, and it might, and I may be wrong. I realize on this precipice, without this convention, whatever's percolating to the Supreme Court, it might be too late when it finally gets there. So, so I do worry about it. And I just pray to God that our beloved country survives the mess that we've gotten ourselves into. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I make a due pass as amended.
we have a motion for due pass, second by Senator Candelaria. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Candelaria.
Yes.
Senator Cervantes.
Yes.
Senator Lopez.
Yes.
Senator McSorley.
No.
Senator Morris.
Yes.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Ivy Soto.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Martinez.
Yes.
Senator Griggs.
You have a due pass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. House Senate Joint Resolution 12 is a free and fair elections resolution, and it calls for an amendment to our U.S. Constitution that will restore free and fair elections in America. Since Congress is incapable of solving, it seems these days, any problem, the resolution calls for a limited Article 5 amendment convention to propose an amendment that would deal with the influence of money in our elections. Most amendments to the Constitution start this way. The states begin calling for a convention, and eventually Congress gets the message and makes the amendment themselves, proposes the amendment themselves. We've never had in this country an Article 5 convention, and yet over 700 times states have called for such conventions to take place, and what usually results is there is a decision by Congress to introduce the amendment themselves. It's the loudest call for reform that the state can take on this issue. We had testimony in the Rules Committee on this measure from U.S. Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, who talked about how there are really only two ways to overturn the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court. One is for Congress to act, the other is for the states to act. Her conclusion was that Congress would not act on this matter because this is a Congress that's been elected by the existing system. It's not going to change that system. The only way we can prod them into action is to call for an Article 5 convention. And with that, I'll stand for debate, Mr. President.
Mr. President, so I do have some questions for the sponsor if he would yield.
Mr. President, yes, I would yield, Senator Scher.
So, Mr. President, I see we're talking about restoring free and fair elections. When was the last free and fair election we had?
I don't know an answer to that, Mr. President. I'm not sure, and Senator Scher, I'm not sure when. I do know that since the Citizens United decision, the amount of money being spent on campaigns and elections and particularly that through what we would call dark money, that is the independent expenditures committees that don't even have to reveal who they get their money from or what they're spending it on. That's just gone out the roof. So that in the years since Citizens United, it's become an entirely different ballgame. So probably I would say let's go back to, the year 2000.
So, Mr. President, my guess is there are people that would argue that the year 2000 wasn't free and fair either, especially because there was a whole lawsuit over that election, at least nationally. So, Mr. President, how much money are we spending on campaigns today?
Mr. President, Senator Scherer, U.S. Representative Michelle Lujan Grisham said that her information indicated that in the last presidential election, the one we just completed, over $7 billion was spent on that election, of which the vast majority was totally unaccounted for. It was spent by wealthy individuals on behalf of independent expenditure committees that had to reveal neither their donors nor their expenditures.
So, Mr. President, $7 billion that's an interesting number. It sounds huge, and it is a huge number. Mr. President, you have any idea what we spend on potato chips in America every year?
Mr. President, on potato chips, Senator Scherer?
Yes, Mr. President, potato chips.
No, I do not know how much we spend on potato chips each year.
So, Mr. President, what's interesting here is we spend about $8 billion in America on potato chips every year. So $7 billion on elections every 4 years, all of a sudden the number doesn't feel that big. While $7 billion certainly is a lot of money, if you compare it to the national GDP and what we spend on potato chips, well, it's nothing. I don't know if this is a great plan or not here, but I do think that we're trying to undo something that has come down to free speech. And really what I would like to see is I would like to see one limit. No foreign money. I don't want the French influencing this election, or the Saudis, or the Russians, or anybody else. No foreign money. That might be acceptable to me. But this whole thing here says we don't have free and fair elections. And I just don't believe that's true. I think we've got perfectly free and fair elections. And the reason that they're free and fair today is precisely because people can still give money to these independent expenditures. It would be better if they gave money to the candidate and reported it, but we've set these limits, and so now we have created the whole realm of dark money. We and Congress have created this realm of dark money. We can uncreate the realm of dark money. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do it. All we have to say is, all right, report. Anything goes, just report it. The other day we had a bill here that says, gosh, if I use my own car in my own gas in my own time for more than $50, I have to report. I'm going, oh my gosh, that sounds like a gotcha. The best way to have free and fair elections, Mr. President, is for us to just get out the way. Just get out of each other's way, and it will happen. Report, yes. Nothing else. And we don't need a constitutional amendment to do that. Let's just do it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further debate, Senator Ivy Soto.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, would my Irish colleague from San Juan County yield?
Top of the morning to you, Senator.
Well, thank you, good sir. Mr. President and Senator Scherer, as I was listening to you speak, and I was actually interestingly eating some potato chips as you were speaking. But as I was listening to you speak, you said that you thought a reasonable limitation would be that we would not have foreign money impacting U.S. elections. Is that correct, Mr. President, Senator?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Senator, how would you know if foreign money impacted our elections?
So, Mr. President, we don't need a constitutional convention to do that. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do that. Today, we have put limits on things, and we have created this scenario of dark money. If we took all of that off and said, report where your money came from, candidate, report who you gave money to, donor. Those two things, and we're done.
Mr. President, Senator Scher, first of all, I find the simplicity of what you're suggesting very attractive, and I tend to agree with you. I've actually, for many years, advocated that we not have contribution limits, although I've actually advocated that we should have reasonable spending limits, but that remove the contribution limits and simply report where it comes from. But if we're going to try to keep certain money, whatever that limitation is, out of politics, the only way we can do that is if we ensure that there is, in fact, reporting. And Mr. President and Senator Scher, right now, unfortunately, we've got these dark money organizations that don't report where their money comes from, that don't report who their contributors are, that don't have limitations as to how much money they can receive, and don't have limitations as to how much money they can spend. And consequently, Mr. President and Senator Scher, we don't know if foreign money is involved in our elections. We just simply don't know right now. And right now, we have no way of knowing. And right now, Congress is so broken, it's not going to change things. Now, Mr. President, Senator Scher, I tend to agree that some of this can be fixed without a constitutional convention. But it'll never be fixed unless Congress takes it seriously enough to make some changes. It'll never be fixed unless Congress says, maybe before we allow a constitutional convention to take place, maybe we should address this issue. And Mr. President and Senator Scher, right now, they're not addressing this issue. And so this is, for me, Mr. President, the big concern on this issue is that I do think that there are some rational limitations that we should have. I think foreign money that Senator Scher suggested is a good start. I tend to agree with him that as long as we have reporting, we shouldn't worry about contribution limits. But we need to have accurate reporting. We shouldn't have a system, Mr. President, where every person who runs for president has a billionaire attached to them funding their campaign unless they happen to be a billionaire themselves. I think that's a problem in our system. And so consequently, I support this measure. I support this measure, not surprisingly, Mr. President, after I amended this measure into the Judiciary Committee. And the amendment in the Judiciary Committee, Mr. President and Senators, is that this petition is valid for 10 years and is withdrawn in 10 years. This is our statement as a legislature, Mr. President, if we pass this. This is our statement of what we find to be an issue today. This is not our statement of what we think the issue might be 60 years from now or 100 years from now. It's our statement of what we believe the issue is today. It also, in the amendment in the Judiciary Committee, provides that this application may not be combined with an application calling for a constitutional convention for any other purpose. So that we don't have any chicanery going on, and I don't think we would, because as Senator Ortiz-Pino commented, there's been over 700 applications for constitutional conventions over the years, and yet we've never had one. But, Mr. President and colleagues, let's say that Congress doesn't listen. Let's say that we make a statement and other states make a statement and Congress doesn't pay attention to it, and we end up in a convention. And then there's a question as to whether or not it can be limited or not. And constitutional scholars disagree, and part of it will have to do with the people who are sent to this convention. But at the end of the day, not only does it take 34 states to call a convention, and I believe this petition is at 5 states. If we were to pass it, we'd become the 6th. They still need to get to 34. But it takes 38 states to ratify a constitutional amendment. Mr. President and Senator Scher, how many states voted for Trump this last year?
Mr. President, I don't recall exactly 43 or maybe 45. Don't remember exactly.
Mr. President and Senator Sher, actually, it was 30 states. I went back and after we were looking at this in judiciary, I went back and I said, well, how many states? If somebody is concerned on the right as to how many blue states might try to manipulate our Constitution, if somebody's concerned on the left as to how many red states might try to manipulate our Constitution, in this last election, 30 states voted for Trump and 20 states voted for Clinton, and it takes 38 states to amend our Constitution. So not only, Mr. President and colleagues, would we become number 6 of a goal of getting to 34 unless Congress takes action before that, the ratification would require both blue states and red states of anything that came out of there. And if what came out of there was not thoughtful and balanced, it would not get ratified. And so I feel, as someone who loves our country and loves our Constitution and believes it is a wonderful document that is very forward-looking, I feel comfortable supporting this. Because supporting this, what we're doing today is we're saying, Congress, hey, pay attention. Listen to us. There's an issue here. And at the end of the day, I feel confident that there are enough protections to protect us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Worth, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to rise and say a few words, and I appreciate very much the amendment that Senator Ivy Soto put on this joint resolution. Without it, I would not have voted for this. I still am going to vote for it with real reservations, because I think the points that Senator Payne makes are good. We just don't know what the Article 5 convention will actually look like when it's implemented, and that scares me. But I, as many know in this body, have been very involved in campaign finance issues, and with Senator Feldman and Senator Hardin carried the bill in 2009 that finally put limits on in our state, and then along came Citizens United. And it really has changed the landscape so dramatically that I have grave concerns for our democratic process moving forward, given these huge amounts of unlimited money that are in the system. So, you know, this is a way for the people to express their frustrations and their concern by coming and pushing something like this. And I can't give enough kudos to all of the young people who have gotten involved in this issue, who care and are looking at our future. And so I have certainly listened to them. And again, based on the 10-year provision, I'm going to support this with the hope that if within the next 10 years we start to get close to the number of states, Congress will engage, because that's really what needs to happen here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Very well. Hearing no further debate, Senator Ortiz-Pino to close.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members, for really good discussion of this issue. I would only mention before closing that the polling nationally is out of the roof on this issue. 80 to 90% in every poll, when citizens are asked about this issue, say that they are worried about the influence, the corrupting influence of unreported, untraceable dark money on our elections. And I would just point out to the point Senator Scherer raised, he's against foreign money. We have no way of knowing when a corporation is giving money what the origins of that money are. It may be a registered American corporation, but the majority stockholders, the majority contributors, the majority of the sales of that corporation may come from a foreign country or from a foreign ownership. Just because a corporation is registered here doesn't mean that it's the money that's being spent is being spent by Americans. So the whole point of this is to try to close out the incredible corruption in our political process that dark money has influenced. And with that, Mr. President, I move that Senate Joint Resolution 12 as amended do now pass. And I ask unanimous consent of the Senate that the record show the roll has been called and all those present voted in the affirmative, except those voting in the negative by a show of hands.
We're voting, Senators, on Senate Joint Resolution 12 as amended. To your seats, those wishing to vote no, please raise your hands. Senator Engel voting no. Senator Payne votes no. Senator Kernan voting no. Senator Grigg votes no. Senator Brandt voting no. Senator Burt votes no. Senator Lavelle voting no. Senator Neville votes no. Senator Scherer votes no. Senator Woods voting no. Senator Gould voting no. Senator White votes no. Senator Rue voting no. Senator McSorley voting no. By a vote of 27 in the affirmative, 14 in the negative, Senate Joint Resolution 12, as amended, has passed the Senate.